Yeah, we went to 2 services for a while, so we had to shorten the sermon, and then now that we're back to 1, they're like, why are your sermons so short? It's like, okay, all right. Today I added several pages. Okay, all right. But we're getting dangerously close to having to do the 2 service thing again, so I'm trying to stay in practice. So we'll see what happens. So I just looked down at the page count at the bottom. It's significantly larger than past sermons, so this is my warning to you guys. I hope you got some of the best church coffee in Charlottesville, and I hope you're ready to go. So let's jump into it. Mike already prayed. Let's open up by reading today's opening passage. I'm hearing things. Do you hear things? Is that Charles? Don't worry, Charles. We'll wait. Da, 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 da. Thank you. 2 days in a row, Charles, we've had to harass you at events. And you still want to go to the men's retreat with us. So it's going to be great. Let's get our Bibles out and open up to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, we're going to open by reading verses 1 through 3. And let's stand together for the reading of the Word. Hebrews chapter 11, beginning at verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. And Lord, again, we give you thanks for your word and pray that you will teach us through it and you will speak to our hearts through your Spirit today. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. So, setting again the context, we can't forget what's at stake in this letter. A church which had formerly been strong, a group of believers who at one time had faced persecution and hardship and accepted it with joy, had slowly but surely gone through a negative metamorphosis of faith. At some point, they grew content with their knowledge. They did not continue to press on in their faith. At some point, they maybe grew bored. At some point, maybe they grew dissatisfied. They started to consider other options. And basically, that's been the theme of this book. Them looking at other options, and the writer of Hebrews saying, but Jesus is better. Them looking at other options, and the writer of Hebrews saying, but Jesus is better. It becomes apparent in this letter that some of the individuals who were part of this fellowship turned their backs on the Messiah, in that they were turning their backs on all of the blessings that grace afforded them. For ages, faithful Jews, we look back, for ages, faithful Jews were given a sense of anticipation that something better was coming. And they said, the law is good, the law is great, and that it provides some form of access to God. It provides a limited means of forgiveness for sins. The law had yearly practices that encouraged believers to look back at the faithfulness of God. But with all those limitations and all of the looking back, there were hints and promises of something better looking forward. A Messiah would come, and in that Messiah there would be hope. They had hope. And so because of that Messiah, there would be better words spoken. There would be better promises. There would be a better priesthood. There would be a better covenant. There would be a better sacrifice. There would be better access to God. All of these things would be better. And that's basically what we've talked about in the first 10 chapters of this letter. So while they were happy to have the law back in the old days, they also had the anticipation that God was going to do something better. But now these people, those who received this letter, after the better thing has been established, the recipients of this letter were looking back with longing to a place where the believers of old looked forward with hope. So they went back to the old religion. They found comfort in the old laws and in the priestly rituals and in the traditions. They had grown slack in the disciplines of belief and faith. And when belief became difficult, they gave themselves to religious activity to satisfy their doubts. Many of those who received this letter were complacent in faith and lazy in thought. They were taking dangerous steps towards apostasy. Thus, the great warning of Hebrews 6 and Hebrews 10, hey, be careful, know the end of this path that you are on. The writer of this letter was doing all that he could to wake them back up. The main objective of his persuasion, the main object of his persuasion was Jesus. Over and over again, he continued to elevate Jesus over the traditions of religion, the things they wanted to go back to. In the previous chapter, he encouraged them by reminding them of their privilege under the blood of Jesus. Then he challenged them to look back. Consider how real your faith was when you faced opposition and persecution. That's what he told them. Look back. Remember when opposition came against you. Remember how real your faith was when that happened. Consider how real your faith was when you, as a Christian, were willing to put yourself in a place of exposure to those who would notice that you are Christians by bringing food and water to those who were in jail for being Christians. Remember how you rejoiced even as they confiscated your belongings. Now, sandwiched between those two encouragements was another warning, outlining again the dire circumstances of intentional denial. But concerning such destruction, he told them, we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but we are of those who have faith and preserve our souls. That's who we are. You might be going down that path, but let me remind you of who you are. You are not a person who should be shrinking back and are destroyed. You should be a person who has faith and who is preserving your soul. So from here, we could have easily jumped to the exhortation of chapter 12, calling them to lay aside every weight and sin and to run the race with endurance. Literally, we could have just jumped straight to chapter 12. But whoever wrote this letter wasn't done yet. First, they tell them that what the nature of faith is. Let me tell you about faith and how that truth was exemplified in the lives of others. Faith is intrinsically tied to hope. The two words are almost the same. You cannot have faith without hope, and real hope for the Christian does not really exist without faith. By definition, hope is this. Hope is positive expectation. If I'm hoping in something, I'm anticipating and expecting that that thing will come to pass. I hope in promises that are made by Jesus because I trust that Jesus is faithful to do what he said he will do. I hope in the promises of the Word because I trust that the Word is true and what it says will come to pass. Now, as we go into this chapter on faith, I want to take the opportunity to talk about hope. Here's what I always say every time we talk about hope. I say the same thing. Hope is not, I hope I win the lottery. That is not hope. Hope is not, well, I hope everything, works out. Well, everything might not work out as you expected. Hope is not, well, I hope that girl that I'm dating likes me. She probably doesn't like you. Except you will. She does like you. Now, today we'll consider 4 unique things about hope. The first thing we'll consider is faith is the essence of hope. These will be repeated. This is just the overview. The second thing is faith is the evidence of unseen events. 3, faithfulness is a commendable testimony. And 4, by faith, God gets all the credit. So point number 1, faith is the essence of hope. We're going to look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, just a little part of it. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. Basically, what we have in verse 1 is both a definition and an application. In the first half, we're given the definition. The wording is better defined. Faith is a hopeful anticipation. For faith is an essence or a nature of expectation. The word things that we see there in the first half of the verse, that word things was added by the translators. It wasn't there in the original language. So the word things, it's not really there in the source material. It is in the second half of verse 1, but it's not in the first half of verse 1. And we're going to talk about things a lot. I believe the translators put it there because we have a hard time grasping the idea of hope without an object to put our hope in. We say we have faith, we say we have hope, but what do we have our faith and our hope in? Obviously, the answer is God. We have our faith and our hope, it's in God. And for most people, they don't stop there. Most people continue on by saying that they have faith and hope in God to do something for them. Oh, okay, so now it's become about you. Yeah, what is your faith and hope in? My faith and hope is in God. Okay, we're good there, period. Oh, no, I have more to say. My faith and hope is in God to do things for me. Now, why do we add this part? Why are we hoping in some act that God might do on our behalf? Well, because this is what we normally do with hope. I hope I win the lottery. We're continually hoping in things. Things isn't there. Remember I told you that? Things isn't there in the first half of verse 1. We're hoping in health. Oh man, I hope I have good health. We're hoping in comfort. We're hoping in rest. We're hoping in prosperity. We're hoping in the things we want and the things that maybe we think we deserve. We're hoping in the things we think will validate God's approval in our life. There is a way of thinking that people fall into. It's like, okay, if I have health and if I have comfort and, and things are going well at work and things are going well, my relationships with my neighbors and my car has not had a transmission issue in like at least 2 years, that means God is favoring me. We fall into that thinking. But I remind you, the word things isn't in that definition. And I don't know why the translators put it there. Things have a way of messing up our thinking. Things have a way of perverting our focus. Things have a way of creating false expectations. Faith is the essence of hope. What do we hope in? Well, we hope in God. Now, to give us a better perspective, let's consider the Lord's Prayer. And I'm going to quote it in the familiar King James because that's, how a lot of us know it. Our Father, who art in heaven, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I'm reflecting back to my Lutheran days as a child. I really wish some bells would ring while I said that. This is my favorite part. Our Father who art in heaven. Dum. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Dum. I loved that. Now this part of the prayer comes before the part where we ask for things. Have you noticed that? Our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God, you're in heaven. You're dwelling in the heavenly place. Your kingdom, you are in charge of what's going on with your kingdom, and your will is going to be done not only on earth, but also in heaven. We're declaring great things about God. That comes first before we even ask for anything. And notice what the things are in the Lord's Prayer. Well, what are the things? Because we want to put our hope in things. What are the things? Give us this day our daily bread. There's your thing. There it is. What are you putting your hope in? What things? My daily bread. The request pertains to need. It doesn't pertain to want. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. What are the things? Food and clothing. The things you need. But even before we ask for things, we're focusing on God's will being done. And here's the thing with God's will. It doesn't always take our wants into consideration. In fact, the outcome of God's will being done might translate over to something quite undesirable in my life. God said, I'm doing this big thing, and as a result, some of my people might suffer. Don't worry, I've given them the tools to deal with that. God's will was done, and the prophets suffered. God's will was done, and the Apostle Paul suffered. God's will was done. Many believers were martyred. Previous studies on hope always take me to Romans chapter 5. Romans chapter 5, if you want to go and look at it, because this is an anchor passage for me. It begins in the second half of verse 2. It answers many of the big questions and is a common landing zone for me when I'm trying to figure out the things of God. I end up here all the time. For it says in the second half of verse 2 that we rejoice in hope. We rejoice in hope. And it attributes the target of that hope as being the glory of God. What are we rejoicing in? What do we rejoice in? That I hope God will be glorified. That is the thing I rejoice in. Well, there's no things there for me. No, there's not. It's all about God. Then it tells us that hope does not put us to shame or does not disappoint. Two things contribute to a hope that does not disappoint. How do I become a person who has a hope that does not disappoint? One, the object of it is God's glory, not things. And two, the creation of this kind of hope in our life is a product of character. Okay, well, how do I get character? This passage tells me that it's a product of endurance, which is a product of suffering. Oh, no, I have to suffer. Don't worry. This world will provide you opportunities. Have you noticed? Have you ever noticed that this world will provide you with opportunities to suffer? Sometimes you provide yourself with opportunities to suffer. If we are still in the place where our hope is crushed because of things, our hope is crushed because of financial issues. Oh, I have no hope. Why? Oh, I can't pay my bills. Your hope is crushed because of comfort issues. I have no hope. Why? Oh, because I have this physical ailment, or my heater is broken and it's cold in my house. Or convenience issues, because those are our biggest issues in this day and age. Well, what's wrong? I don't have a signal on my phone. My Wi-Fi's down at house. Our hope is crushed because of people issues. We're just doing the best we can with people. Don't put a lot of hope there. If those are the things that crush our hope, then we haven't allowed character to be produced in our life. That's the reality of this passage. If our hope is crushed because things disappoint us, then we have not allowed character to be produced in our life. All of these things can disappoint us and bum us out. All of these things can upset us. But if they affect our hope, that is, if they affect our faith in God, then it's a sign that we have not progressed well through the suffering which produces endurance, which produces character. I just want character. Well, sorry, this is the path to it. Life's going to provide you suffering. How are you going to deal with that? Well, I'm going to get upset. Well, then you're not going to get the character. Life's going to provide you with hardship. What are you going to do? I'm going to endure it with faith. Oh, awesome. Endurance is the thing that's going to bring you to a place of character. And once you're in character, your perspective on hope is going to change. Now, this life will continue to give us suffering in one degree or another, and we might shake our fist as a response to it. We might say, I do good things. I tithe. I don't cheat. I'm good to other people. I live a clean life, and yet still I suffer. What's the use? What's the use? Not much of a house for not much of a donkey. What's the use? Now, maybe you felt this way before to some degree. I know I have. I know I felt that this way, and if this is something that you can relate to, I'm sure it is. If we're trying to do right things and yet we experience hardship and that produces frustration, well, I think the Bible has something to say to us. Let's follow the rabbit trail for a minute, okay? Let's go down this rabbit trail with me. And it's in my notes, so I'm not just doing a thing. So let's follow the logic of that question. What's the use? All right? Let's follow the logic of that question. First off, it's based on an understanding that God works on a reward system. That's what that idea is based on. I do good things and I still suffer. What's the use? That thinking is based on a false idea that God works on a reward system. We do good things. In return, God gives us a happy life and a big house. That form of thinking will shipwreck you and will disappoint your hope over and over again. Remember, Romans 5 says hope does not disappoint. That kind of hope will shipwreck you. It will disappoint you because your hope is in things, not in God. So here we are doing good things, and yet we still suffer, and we say, what's the use? And so we quit doing good things. Now answer me this question. If you stop being faithful, say, well, I'm not going to tithe anymore, or I'm not going to pray anymore, or I'm not going to serve God anymore, or I'm not going to worship, or I'm not going to serve other people anymore, is the quality of your life now suddenly going to improve? Yeah, suddenly, oh man, now everything's going to get better because I'm not doing things for God. Is this why we are in this Christianity thing? Is this why we're here? To feel good and to be happy? For a better quality of life? Is that why we're here? Is this the reason why we immerse ourselves into the Christian community so that our life can be good, blessed, comforted, and successful? Listen, if life quality comes before relationship with God, then our priorities are way off. Let me say that again. If life quality comes before relationship with God, then our priorities are way off. Write that down. Tweet that. But let me answer this question on a practical level. Will your quality of life improve if you stop doing good things? Well, maybe, maybe not. Truth is, it's an irrelevant point. And let me look at this passage from Matthew chapter 5 to prove it. So it's like, well, what did Jesus say? Matthew 5, 44 through 45. But I say to you, this is verse 44, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Oh, wait a minute. If they're persecuting me, why should I love them and pray for them? I should actually maybe beat them up. No. It's not what Jesus said. Keep doing good things even though you're being persecuted. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven, for he makes his sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. God, don't you know who's down here? Don't you know we have good and evil people? What are you doing? He said, I'm raining on both of them. The rain falls on the good and the bad. So if we're asking, what's the use of doing good? Then we're actually admitting that good deeds are to us a burden and we would rather not be doing them. That's our confession. We're actually confessing an idolatry issue. What's the use of doing good works? You know what? You're an idolater. Oh, how can you say that? Because you're placing life quality and things over your relationship with God. We're openly admitting to idolatry. And listen, I confess, I'm one of those people who at times has asked this question and will be again. Oh, what's the use? I'm doing the right thing, and yet still this kind of stuff happens. And it's not a matter of faith. It's not a matter of reason. It's simply a matter of emotional stress, fear, and confusion. If we suffer from bad theology, then we can compound our confusion all the more. I've seen people who enjoy the excitement of the confessional faith. They enjoy it. They enjoy the doctrines on prosperity. They love Joel. They love the TBN teachers. They love the idea that if I have faith, God will give me stuff. Man, I'm good. I have faith. God gives me stuff. And when things are working and things are going good and you get the raise and you're being blessed and this stuff happens and we're in a season where nothing is broken in our house. That season only lasts about 3 days, by the way. And we're in a season where nothing is broken and no loved ones have died recently and there's money left after the bills are paid. And in times like that, wow, that doctrine is a blast. It is. Man, those people are having a good time. It's so self-affirming because it's all about our pride and our sense of personal accomplishment. Look what I did with my faith. Here's proof that I have great faith. Look at my things. Nothing is broken in my house. No transmission issues. Man, look at my faith. But here's the pitfall of that doctrine. When things go bad, you have no other option than to blame yourself and then ultimately blame God. I know a handful of people whose lives have been totally shipwrecked. Their hope has been disappointed because when the wife left or when the loved one died, they didn't have a biblical recourse to fall back on. They only had their bad doctrine, and that doctrine laid the blame for their hardships right upon their lack of faith. Wrong thinking about God and about His Word leads us to a place of disappointment when the things we hope in don't come to pass. We don't want to suffer disappointment in life. We don't want to. So according to Romans 5, we need character. But to get character, we need to learn how to endure. And to gain endurance, we need to take those opportunities of suffering and use them for God's glory. So you might ask, well, what is the essence of hope? It's the recognition that this is a reality. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Do we recognize that as being real? The essence of hope is an expectation in God's will, not an expectation in things. The second half of Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, gives us our second point, point 2, the application of faith. And for those of you who are writing down points and thinking, wow, Chad hardly ever gives us points, this is just a special gift for you guys today. Point number 2, the application of faith. Faith is the conviction of things not seen. Now, faith is the evidence or the conviction of unseen events. It's another way of wording this. Most of our translations say things not seen. Things is actually in this part, okay? Things are okay now. All right? Things being bad, that was point number 1. Now things are okay. The word things is actually here, but it's not always translated as things. It's also translated as events or tasks or certain matters. The conviction or the event or the evidence of events not seen. Or the conviction or the evidence of tasks not seen. Or the conviction or the evidence of certain matters unseen. Since we are so things focused, we often think that faith applies to matters of assurance as it pertains to things we want and things we expect. And this might be true in some instances, but this thinking is a step towards disappointment. You might not get your debts paid off. You might not get your new laptop. You might not drive a BMW. No matter how confident you feel about it, no matter what words you speak, that BMW might not end up in your driveway. And if it does, you're going to go get an oil change, and they're going to tell you that you need to pay them $3,000, and then you'll decide to trade it in for a Honda. Okay? That's what I did. Again, we have to look back to Romans chapter 5. Hope and faith are not about us. Hope and faith are about God, and more specifically about God being glorified. Now, I'm not saying that we're all bound for, that means we all have to suffer and we're all bound for destitution. I'm saying that just because you want something doesn't mean you're going to get it. That's all I'm saying. Again, where does the rain fall? On the just and the unjust. The rain of comfort and prosperity might fall on some and not on others. Someone with little faith might be healthy and comfortable. Oh, why are they healthy and comfortable? Why do they have a lot of money? Why are they driving the nice car? Why do they have a swimming pool? Well, the rain falls. Someone with great faith might be unhealthy and homeless. Why? Well, in spite of the doctrines of self-centered gratification that abound in the church, God's presence, favor, and validation are not presented into our lives in the form of our wants being satisfied. It's still a matter of thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I've had the privilege of working with Christians all over the world. I've had the privilege of working with Christians in the middle of war in Sudan. I've had the privilege of working with Christians in Bolivia and in Mexico and in India. And I see Christians who have great faith and great belief in God who are definitely not living comfortable lives. It's still a matter of thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. These are the unseen things. These are the unseen events. The matters of God's kingdom, the matters of God's will, the matters of a hope that is focused upon God being glorified. This is what faith is all about. It's about God doing what God does and us, his servants, expecting it and trusting in it. Faith should take our focus off of ourselves, and for some, this is a troubling endeavor. Because this is where we're putting our faith, in the outcome of the things that we want, in the things. But for me, it's actually liberating. Like once we realize this, it is liberating. I cannot tell you how many times in my life I've pulled out the checklist of godly validation. Okay, am I a godly person? Let me pull out the checklist of godly validation. Am I happy? Yes, I am. Check. Am I content? Oh, yes. Check. Am I stress-free? Oh, yeah, there was that one time. Check. Yeah. Do I have money? On the first of the month, check. That's 4 checks. I must be in God's will. Now, for me, this kind of thinking is stressful. Did I make the right decision? Did I take the right job? Should I really be teaching this Sunday school class? Yes, you should, by the way. Should I starch my shirts? Yes. Lord, how much? Should I get the heavy starch or the medium starch? Like, I once knew a guy, it's like every single thing you asked him, he said he had to pray about it. I'm like, dude, it's a taco or a burrito. Come on. Does God want me to eat Mexican or Indian? You know, we pull out our checklist and it creates all kinds of stress and turmoil that God never put on us. The reality is our checklist doesn't mean anything because we're seeking validation in things. What happens when we put our hope in things? We will be disappointed. What does Romans 5 say? Hope does not disappoint. Our hope is in the wrong stuff. When we put our hope in God being glorified, we won't be disappointed. No matter what we do or do not check off of our list, God is going to be glorified. It might be in a time of stress. It might be, I might not be content with my situation. I might be low on cash, but God is going to be glorified. And my goal is not to experience my things. My goal is to see God be glorified. That's my goal. Here's another way to consider this. Are we going to be those who are willing to honor him and worship him and glorify him simply because he's worthy of it, regardless of the state of our things, regardless of how many things we can check off of our godliness validation list? Is he still worthy of our honor and of our worship? When we step out to honor God and do things that he's called us to do, you know, we won't always have the benefit of comfort to validate our work. I firmly believe that God made this town of Charlottesville special to me. Like a long time ago. Like I literally moved to Virginia in 1991. Even before I remotely considered being a pastor, I always wanted to be in full-time ministry. And the very last thing on the list was pastor in America. That's like the very bottom of the list. You know, maintenance man in Peru was like number 1. So even before I remotely considered being a pastor, and it was pretty miraculous the way the doors opened for us to move here. But those first 5 or 6 years here were probably the hardest years of my life. They were hard. What are we doing here? We are living in poverty. What are we doing here? We can't feed our family. What in the world are we doing here? And if it were about me and my things and my idolatry, man, I would have bailed on this gig a long time ago. Point number 3, faithfulness is a commendable testimony. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 2, for by it the people of old received their commendation. Now, I'm going to include verses 4 through 40 in this section. Okay? You can look at them if you want. We'll look at some of them. For what do we see in those verses, 4 through 40? These are the popular ones. What do we see in those verses? Well, we see commendable testimonies of people who walked in faith. The writer of this letter is about to give the accounts of several Old Testament saints. He's going to outline the testimonies of their faithfulness. He's going to speak of those who, verse 13, died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. He's going to speak to those who experienced credible things. Those who, verse 33, through faith conquered kingdoms and enforced justice and obtained promises and stopped the mouths of lions. He's going to speak to those who experienced despairing things. Those who, verse 36, suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. They experienced these things because they were obedient by faith to live for God's kingdom come, God's will be done. And here's the cool thing. Here's the coolest part of their testimony. Look back at verse 16, the second half. Here's the coolest part of their testimony. God is not ashamed to be called their God. Wow. Now I want to be in this list. Some of the people mentioned here, we look at them and say, that person's kind of a creep. Why are they in the list? They didn't always do good things. Sarah laughed at God's promise. What's she doing here? Rahab was a prostitute. What's she doing here? Jephthah, that guy made a stupid vow and may have ended up killing his own daughter because of it. Samson, do we really need to say anything about that knucklehead? What in the world is he doing here? Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm so glad that Samson is in this list. Because I try to live by faith, but I fail a lot, and I act out in my flesh a lot. And even when I'm being stupid, I'm still believing fully in who God is and what God can do. And I believe Samson did that. Man, he believed what God was going to do. I'm glad that Sarah is here because my response to the big promises are not always positive. Sometimes the promises of God just seem ridiculous. Oh, what, God, are you kidding? Are you kidding me right now? In the moments that I might find myself laughing at them. I'm glad Jephthah is here because I try to live by faith, but I say stupid things. You ever said stupid things? Well, Jephthah's in the Hall of Faith. I'm glad Jacob is here because I try to live by faith, but sometimes I feel like I need to do a little scheming and scamming to make things work according to my flesh. I'm glad Moses is here because I try to live by faith, but I doubt myself. I doubt my abilities. I don't like the sound of my own voice. If I turn the radio on between 9 and 9:27, I turn it off right away. It's like, ugh. I don't like the sound of that guy's voice. I have all kinds of doubts. And every one of these lived by faith, and God was not ashamed to be called their God. Now, here's something obvious that this list should be showing us. Obviously, God sees through our humanity. Obviously, God doesn't work on a 3 strikes and you're out system. Obviously, we are those who in our hearts truly believe and trust, but still in our flesh, we say stupid things. We laugh at God's promises. We scam and we scheme where we should have faith. We doubt our own abilities. We might have a lot of mistakes behind us. We might be able to move beyond them. Our unsaved coworkers and family members might get beyond these past mistakes. Here's something I've learned. Sometimes unsaved people forgive us a lot quicker than saved people do. Sometimes unsaved people are like, yeah, whatever, I'm over that. Let's move on. And then the Christians are like, I'm going to remember what you did forever. You're eternally judged as the person who did that thing. Sometimes Christians even, sometimes they actually even forgive one another. Sometimes spouses forgive. So, I'm going to forgive that thing and I'm going to forget it. Sometimes our own children forgive us for the blind scientific experiment of parenthood that we have subjected them to. Like we actually know what we're doing. It's like, oh, my parents, I can't believe they did those things to me. It's like, we had no idea what we were doing. We make mistakes, and that affects the way we deal with one another, but God is judging by something deeper. Is our hope intact? Are we still content to live for His kingdom come, in spite of how questionable our kingdoms are? If so, I hope that we would be those for whom God is not ashamed to be called our God. Fourth point. We're almost there. I know you're excited because this is a long sermon and you've been asking for those. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. By faith, God gets all the credit. All right, that's point number 4. By faith, who gets the credit? God gets all the credit. God is responsible for everything we see around us. Faith keeps us from assigning him to just a few parts of our life here and there. That's what faith keeps us from doing. Faith keeps us from demoting him and partitioning him into sections of our life, into different activities. These are the activities where God is. You know, these are the places where I can acknowledge God, only on certain days, though. Faith keeps us from lowering him to the form of an idol or placing him in a crowd of other deities. By faith, we recognize that he is the God who is omnipotent, meaning he has all the power, who is omniscient, meaning he knows everything, who is omnipresent, which means he's everywhere. By faith, we don't develop our own ideas of who God is. He is who he is, and he gets all the credit. Now, let me wrap this up with a few concluding points. And in fact, the band, you guys can come up here. Faith is the essence of hope. That's where we started. It's not about things, but rather it's about God. We hope in God. 3 different times in the book of Psalms, when David was depressed, he told himself, here's what he was declaring. The word self wasn't there, but it was almost as if he said, self, hope in God. 3 different times he told himself, hope in God. He's like, you could do this. Who is he talking to? Himself. He knew that beyond his circumstances, there was still an abundant reason to praise God. Faith is the evidence of unseen events. This is the application of our faith. It's not placed in things, but rather our faith is placed in God's kingdom come, God's will be done. Our faith is in him, not in us. Our hope is focused on God's glory, not in our things. Those who live by faith might experience great victories, or they might be destitute, wearing the skins of goats, living in caves. We can't be those who seek validation for God's leading with a checklist of things. By faith, we press on, hoping that God will not be ashamed to have us call him Lord. Finally, it's by faith that God gets all the credit. He continues to be who he is in our heart, not by worldly logic or reason, but by faith. But by